Welcome to the next in the series of global panel discussions from TR2050 on the future reward. My name is Ben Shenoy, and I'm a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. In this series, we're exploring how to value and compensate workforces in the years ahead. This question is at the heart of TR2050, which stands for Total Rewards 2050, a global initiative that brings together experts in reward from around the world. Today's panel discussion takes place in Dubai at the offices of the GHG Alliance. We've already had a session in London, which you can find on LinkedIn, and we will be in Stockholm and Boston later this year. We'll be looking at topics such as workforce structure, paying for performance, paying for skills, and the role of technology in the evolving world of reward. It is my pleasure to introduce today's panel. We have Nancy Gleason. Nancy is professor in practice at New York University at Abu Dhabi. We have Mariia Lytvyn. Mariia is the global head of total rewards at the GHG Alliance and is our host today. Thank you very much, Mariia. We have Fermin Diez, who's a reward expert and an adjunct professor at the National University of Singapore. We've got Sandrine Bardot, who's a total rewards expert at the Bardot Group. And we have Pascale Saar-Naville, who's director of group performance reward at AIA. Welcome, all of you, and thank you for joining us today. Let us turn to workforce structure. So the emergence of the gig economy means traditional rewards could give way to more flexible options in the future. Rewarding gig workers and the gig workforce raises issues in context of the war for talent in the Middle East and the Asia-Pacific region. For example, how do we address questions of pay equity between gig and non-gig workers? Where we pay bonuses to permanent staff, should we do the same for gig workers? Can reward systems be used to improve the engagement of gig workers? So question to all of you, how are reward systems coping with the rise of the gig workforce? And what changes do you anticipate over the next few years? Nancy, if I may start with you.
Sure, great. Thank you so much, Ben, and it's lovely to join all of you today here with TR2050 and GFG. Workforce transformation is what needs to happen, but it happens slowly, and pay is an important piece of that. But when we think about equity and gig workers, we need to ensure that equity doesn't seem unfair to existing employees, and pay needs to align with difference. This is extremely challenging for different types of employers to understand, because right now payment and rewards is based on some kind of hierarchical salary level or understanding of what you do. With the gig economy, we need to start to reward change agents differently because they are the crucial element within the team. So this is what we're seeing in the Middle East, is that there's a new class of employee that sees systemically what gig employees don't have to see. And they can work collaboratively as change agents to help realign the existing goals for our current employees and help inject the gig worker. So those cultural change agents play a role in negotiating new obligations in the workplace. And that is workforce transformation that's complex and needs to be appropriately rewarded. And it's a reward category we don't often have. So many organizations are now, for example, creating chief AI officers, right? And what does that mean? Part of that work is understanding what skills we reward for and the permanentness of those roles, how necessary they are. You actually don't even need a chief AI officer very long. It's like, imagine if you still had a chief internet officer. That would be silly. Or chief email officer. So these are temporary roles in and of themselves, but they're necessary and they need to be compensated at a pretty high level.
Right. Great. Thank you. There's a couple of great points there, Nancy, around the role of change, gig workers in change. They used to be, in a number of companies many years ago, chief telephone officers. So, which we don't have now, I don't think. So great point there. And the role that the gig workers play in injecting change into organizations is fascinating. So thank you, Nancy. Mariia, same question to you.
First of all, I totally agree with Nancy. And I'm seeing the increase of gig workers and appetite for that sort of like critical talent right now in Middle East. Addressing the issue, I guess, like of the incentive plan, it was your second question about like whether they have to be rewarded in a similar way as we are paying bonuses to full-time workers. I think it is essential to address what drives gig workforce here. So it's not necessarily they will be motivated and driven by standardized cash rewards. So we need to address our entire remuneration structure to sort of like try and understand like whether the incentives in a traditional sense, such as bonuses, are going to be the motivating factor. We do want to continue motivating them because, like in essence, gig workers are the ones who are going to drive change, as Nancy just said, right? Like, and we have the appetite of people to be able to move from project to project. So perhaps the incentives there would be providing them the opportunity to access the top quality projects, providing them the opportunity to have flexible scheduling, and just basically building rewards around flexibility. So we have to be quite mindful of this. And again, to Nancy's points as well, we also have to be mindful not to be able to, not to create this sort of like absolute wide gap in between our full-time workers and gig workers, because then we do not want to disengage your full-time workforce by introducing a more preferential terms to your gig workers as well. So I think it needs to balance. We need to dive in much deeper into the entire sort of like remuneration strategy of organization, and organizations have to decide for themselves whether they want to go to the next level in terms of rewarding those employees, or they would like to keep the traditional sort of structures in place.
Right, correct. Thank you, Mariia. And again, both you and Nancy, this tension between difference, we need to leverage this difference whilst keeping equity. How do we do that? And we'll touch upon this later, definitely, I'm sure. But how do we motivate these different types of individual who are coming to our organizations? So great. Thank you very much. Pascale, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think fascinating topic. And I think what we do see is that part-time and gig professionals, they do support, as you said, right, organizations to address flexibility, talent shortage or skill gaps. So I think with the growth of those maybe a little bit more non-traditional working models, what happens for an organization ultimately is the workforce becomes much more complex. So there's an increase in the complexity. And from a people strategy or people practices perspective, this means that we need to address that holistically and in an integrated fashion. So not as a reward standalone question, but across the disciplines, talent, engagement, learning, or org design, you name it, right? Correct. So it's a much more holistic question, because I think ultimately what we're all trying to do is to create a space where everybody can thrive and can be productive, be it as a gig worker or be it in a traditional working model. From a rewards perspective, I echo right what my colleagues are saying. I think there's a lot to look at the performance and rewards framework. I think we shouldn't forget about benefits. Benefits have been originally designed for the traditional working model, so I think that's something to think about as a rewards practitioner. I think evolving. Yeah, yes. And I think the other part, I think is, I think we should continue to focus on paying competitively and fairly across the working models. And in particular, fair pay is a big topic. We see research, right? The pay gap for women in the gig economy is larger, significantly larger compared to traditional, in particular, full-time working females. So that's something to watch out. So for an in-house practitioner, we need to strike a balance, right? It's about delivering meaningful, employee-centric rewards, performance and rewards frameworks to address the facets that we have in our workforce. But it's also ensuring that it's competitive, that it's fair, that it's transparent, and that we can operationalize it. So I think that's probably some things to think about.
Thank you, Pascale. And again, this leveraging the complexity, you have to cope with it. Can we use it to actually adapt to the situations we find ourselves in? Great. Thank you, Pascale. Sandrine, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yes, so I'm a member of the gig economy. So
So let me give you maybe both a professional as a rewards expert, but also as a member of the gig economy. An experience as I set up the first independent consultancy here in the region 11 years ago. And at the time, nobody knew that you could go to an independent consultant. So the whole concept that skilled professional could work independently was only barely starting to emerge. I want to say, I mean, I wrote a post, it was a rant actually on LinkedIn just a few weeks ago, and it went viral. I didn't expect. But there was a company that had reposted, because they had approached me 6 months before, a job for a compensation manager with 12 years of experience, and the pay level was not even that of a compensation analyst starting in their career. So when they had approached me for the job, I said, guys, first of all, I don't want a job, but what you pay is not going to be acceptable. What I can do for you, either you review your expectations of the skills you're looking for the budget that you have, or you review your expectation of finding somebody as a full-time employee. I can offer you the services of somebody that I work with on a regular basis who could come to you as a freelancer or whatever format we find, consultant, whatever, for 3 days a week for that price. Because then if you equate that to a full-time job, that would be more aligned with what the pay level should be. And they refused. Now, fast forward 6 months later, they're still looking for that position, right? So I write a post, which is like, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? That's the opening line, because I was really upset. I didn't say which company it was, but then I got a lot of reactions. And it's so funny because in the meantime, I'm approached by another headhunter who's looking for an open position, asking me, do you know somebody for this job? And I find that the job is actually could be very well be a project. I'm like, well, actually, if your client is happy to transform this job into a project, I could do it for them 3 days a week. And that one said yes immediately. Like from the Friday, I started on the project on the Tuesday. That was like super fast. Very untypical of the Middle East, I have to say. So that to show that there are some companies that are understanding, what am I looking for? Is it really a permanent job, or am I looking for a specific outcome which could be tied to kind of a project? And the other thing I would say is also the statistic that I read recently that was presented to a group of HR directors here in Dubai 2 weeks ago from Gallup. They had done a survey maybe in 2022 or 23, and 25% of the companies they had surveyed were seriously considering creating a gig economy manager position. And I think in London you had somebody who mentioned, who manages this gig economy? It's not us, it's not the reward professionals, it's the procurement team. And they have no clue what they're doing. All they're trying to do is reduce the cost because their KPIs are based on that. That's not how you manage somebody who's independent. Maybe for an outsourced or a contractor, but like for independents, that's not the way it works. And also, if you're a smaller gig worker and you have to go through a procurement process which is designed for monstrous organizations who have an army of people to fill in like tons of documentation and having insurance that we're not even able to access as an independent worker and so on, the market needs to also adapt. So I think we need to think as a reward professional, who do we manage? Is it only the core workforce of the organization, or is it also a wider workforce? So I think those are the things that we need to think about. And pay equity, we could talk about it for hours, but I'm just going to stop it there.
Thank you, Sandrine.
Can I add on the point
Nancy,
for a moment?
please.
Just also, I completely agree with this, and I would add too that one of the shifts that's occurring is that experience no longer equals merit.
Yeah.
And we need to pay younger people more if we want them to live in expensive cities. Some of the students who graduate from my university are being offered 2,000 dirham a month for a very prestigious internship. This is not a livable wage in any way, shape, or form. And it's like because they're younger, they're supposed to take it. Yes. And that talent is very good. And so if we don't also figure out a way to not treat young people as gig workers who are looking for permanent jobs and cultures to be a part of, and treat them with a little bit more dignity and equity, this will also help with this project-based work.
Yeah. And I think just like to add on this, like for a future-looking organization, and obviously So we have here at GFG Alliance a key goal to become carbon neutral by 2030. And we do understand that we need to dive into the talent pool of a younger workforce because they're more vibrant, they're faster, they're brighter. And in order to do that, like actually organizations right now, including ourselves, we are investing in development of the skills for the youngsters. So we are having it's actually a key business strategy for us to focus on apprenticeship programs, on internship programs, and even providing the necessary sort of like materials for schools as well that operate across the region and where we have businesses as well. So I actually think this is a really good point, and it's something that needs to be solved as well.
Great. Thank you, Sandrine, Nancy, Mariia. Fermin, as a gig worker and top HR influencer, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I hope you guys will edit that. Very good.
Fermin, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think it'll be a mistake to try to emulate what we do for full-time workers to gig workers. It's a mistake to assume that, on two fronts actually, it's a mistake to assume that the way we pay full-time workers is right. That in itself is a problem. But the second problem is that we then want to make this extensive, and that the way we want to achieve equity in the way we pay gig to non-gig is by making the gig pay like the non-gig. I think it's a mistake. I think people decide to be gig workers. I, for one, I know Sandrine the same, for a very specific reason. One of them is we don't want to be corporate. And I don't want to be paid like a corporate. I don't want to have. I want a different way of working. I want a different style of working. And because of that, I don't actually expect then the usual trappings of pay that involve, the long-term incentive with a 3-year cliff vesting and the bonus at the end of the year. None of that appeals to me. What appeals to me is much different, and the way I want to be paid for the work I do is much different. And it's a decision I made, it's a conscious choice that I make. It's right.
Very different from what now.
I think the point that they're making is also true, that sometimes people are being almost forced to go into a gig type of work, not of their choice. And I think this is a problem that needs to be addressed. But I also think a lot of people decide to be gig because that is how they wish to work. Maybe they want to have more than one job. Maybe they want to do different things. I know in my case, I can only really speak for myself. Sure. Do it for a reason. So for me to be paid with a bonus and the sort of, it would totally make no sense. I would prefer to be paid by benefits. I would be on time. But which leads us down a very different path. The path then is to say we should pay gig workers. Yes, there must be equity in the amounts, equity in the what a skill is worth, equity and contribution commensurate to pay, but not necessarily in the mechanisms on which we deliver this pay. So to try to then create, I want to say, a more personalized way of paying a gig worker that suits them and their lifestyle and their needs much more than it suits the corporate need for one size fits all.
Right. So you're raising some great questions here, right, Fermin, about are we paying permanent staff the right way? Is that the right basis? Should we be? You're pushing towards topics we'll be covering elsewhere in this panel around flexibility, personalization, and different bases of remuneration and compensation.
I'd like to. I think the conversation is not just about the cash component.
Yes.
I think especially for, let's say, experienced gig workers, because I think between gig there are so many different things. I mean, there's the Uber driver, there's the young graduate who can't find a job, and then there's the people like me and Fermin who have had a long career and then decided not to be in the corporate world anymore for whatever reason. But maybe we value different things, like the flexibility, but also the learning. Like if I'm going to spend, some of my clients, for me, for example, I spend between 3 hours and 2 years with a client. So it's quite a wide range. But for those that I stay longer, I'd love to be able to access, for example, their internal learning management system and benefit from that. That would have value to me because I can't access it as an individual. or, the flexibility of not having to be in an office and stuff like that, or coming and going at the timings that I want, not having to fingerprint in order to access a building like an employee. Like, I don't want to be tracked like an employee. I'm not an employee. So don't track me like an employee.
But you bring up a really important point here, which is that across this ecosystem, we can synchronize learning activities so that all employees have and all employers are contributing to the upskilling crisis that we have, whether you're gig or not. And it's how organizations have worked around it, that their permanent staff are basically giggers, right? I mean, if you Google me, I have 3 different titles with the same employer. So I'm gigging inside the organization.
You're sequential.
Yes.
Yeah. And not just over time. I have 3 titles right now. So is this gigging inside the firm? And I think we need these to synchronize these learning activities, which help us renegotiate these formal roles between gig and permanent staff.
Right.
Yeah.
We will be coming to the point about pay for skills, because that clearly builds on what you've just said, Nancy. Thank you. Thank you, Fermin, as well. Great discussion. I want to turn now to look at pay for performance. So pay for performance, again, has an evolving role in rewards shaped by changes in workforce dynamics and organizational priorities, as well as an increasing desire, which you've just talked about, to tailor compensation to individual roles, individual contributions. But this raises some issues about assumptions that are baked into our rewards model, our historic rewards model. For example, the average merit increase of about, say, 2 to 3% doesn't really align with research that suggests that for motivation, you probably need something more like 7 to 10%. How can reward systems balance individual contributions with collective performance? So whether it's team or whole organization. And if you're going to go down that route, what data would you need to collect and how would you manage it? And perhaps more fundamentally underneath all of this is the question of, to what degree does money actually motivate performance, right? So this really brings the question of, should we personalize rewards so that individuals can choose the size of the financial component of their package? So Sandrine, you talked about money versus learning, for example, right? It's a question to all of you. Pay for performance could evolve in many different ways over the next few years. What changes do you foresee? And for me, let's start with you this time.
Wow, so much to unpack there in your question. Okay, let me start here for folks that may be listening. I think one of the biggest assumptions that we have in the entire realm of rewards is that pay for performance works. And I know as I say this, anybody listening to this video is going to say, but of course it works. What are you talking about? So let me try to make 2 or 3 points to get us started in this discussion. What is the one thing that is guaranteed to upset our employees at the end of the year?
Non-fair pay for performance.
Pay for performance is the one thing, merit increase, bonus time, it is guaranteed. Second thing, what is the one thing that in the employee engagement survey we do the least about? Because we always make this assumption around rewards that, employees always want more. Imagine if our marketing department surveyed our customers and our customers said something along the lines of, our customers always want better quality for lower price. Don't listen to that. But when our employees say that they, don't feel satisfied with their pay, we completely dismiss what they have to say to us. So it's a compounded problem that they are upset whenever we do pay for performance, and we don't do anything about it, even when they tell us. Now, let's go into a little bit further. How easy or hard is it to actually set KPIs at the individual level all the way down the organization? And I want everybody listening to this video to think about this clearly. You are trying to set a KPI sometime around October that is going to last for the entire next year, and that we're going to evaluate sometime the following February. That's almost a year and a half later. And everybody has to live with it. Now, if you're in sales, if you are coding in an IT company, that makes a lot of sense. But if you are, say, in an HR department, if you are, say, an analyst in compensation, how exactly does that look like? We know this to be a problem. We know that setting KPIs all the way down the organization is difficult. We cover it up with this whole mantle of pay for performance, and we make people upset. Why do we continue to do something that doesn't work and we know doesn't work? It's a big problem that I've had all along. But one last thing so I can let others speak. And it's the point about, do we even know from a rewards perspective what works? 80-20 mix or 70-30 mix? Which one is better? Which one would produce better engagement? Which one would produce lower turnover? Which one would produce better results for the company? Would it be better to do performance shares or stock options? Would it be better to do 3-year cliff vesting or 5-year cliff vesting? What exactly would comprise a way to pay that we know, for fact, with analytics, drives better company performance? And you know, I have yet to see any writing, any company, anyone that can tell me, I've tried this and I've tried that and this works. So we continue to do rewards and pay for performance with no data, which is scary.
Lovely. Thank you, Fermin. I think it's Mark Twain who said, it's not what we don't know that gets us into trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so, which is pretty much what you just said.
Exactly right.
Okay.
We are so sure that we got this right. And when you dig,
where's the evidence base to support it? Great. Thank you. Pascale, what are your thoughts on it?
I shouldn't go next. Maybe I should. Paper performance, right? Ever loved. I actually think that paying for impact, paying for innovation, paying for productivity, from a company perspective, it's really important. You have to reward those things, and you also have to reward for the behaviors that a company needs to drive impact, innovation, productivity. So you need to get that balance, and you need to make sure that what Fermin just said, that there's an alignment to, if possible, to the longer term strategy, or at least to operational goals, which is not an easy undertaking, right? I think it's very complicated. So you need a strong communication toolkits to enable people to understand their pay, and in particular the incentive outcomes, transparent incentive outcomes. So for rewards, as an in-house rewards practitioner, it means that we need to create communication toolkits to help managers and HR colleagues to explain so that people understand. So in my head, I think ultimately paying for impact or rewarding for impact, rewarding for behaviors is key. But I do agree there's a lot of questions, especially as organizations move rapidly, right? And as we just said, workforce moves rapidly. We need to take a step back and think about, well, is our performance and rewards framework and ultimately the incentive outcomes, is it aligned to our strategy and to the goals? Are we actually rewarding for impact, innovation, productivity? And are we rewarding for the behaviors? And those behaviors, as you said, right, they could well be behaviors to incentivize people to work together and create collective output for our stakeholders. It's not necessarily all individualized, but it's tricky. So I think this paying for impact, paying for behaviors is important. I think communication is key, and we probably need to focus more on that, because I do believe that if people understand the performance and rewards framework and the incentive outcomes that they get, I do believe that that creates an understanding and maybe a feeling of something greater, and ultimately I would hope that we can create a culture of appreciation. So the corporate view.
Let me add something to that. I think it's interesting that we are so that the notion that we could have a pay package with no bonus is almost unthinkable. So here's a challenge. Can we experiment 6 months, a year, maybe just one department, maybe just HR, where we do away with bonuses for a year? Just pay everybody, calculate what their target bonus is going to be, add it to their base for a whole year, and see what happens.
Yeah. Measure what happens. Yeah.
Because we're so afraid that if we take away the bonus, performance will collapse. I don't think there's an HR person in the world that wakes up any particular day thinking, what am I going to do today to maximize my bonus at the end of the year? So the whole notion that we work for money is difficult. A salesperson wakes up every single morning thinking, what am I going to do today to maximize my incentive? Maybe top executives wake up every morning, what am I going to do today to maximize share price? But I'm not saying that HR don't. I just
what you're pointing to is the nature of the work and how fungible it is, how measurable the link between effort and outcome.
Varies motivation, extrinsic motivation.
Yes.
And you work for money, or do you work for just your intrinsic motivation?
Yeah.
I think we will have no loss of performance with increased attraction and increased retention. And if we think of pay packages to attract, retain, and motivate, which is basically what we do, then if we can attract better, retain better with no loss of motivation, why isn't this a good idea? But I'm not saying this is better. I'm saying go try, experiment, pilot, and then make up your own mind with your own company data.
Okay.
I do not disagree with you, Fermin, but I think we need to be quite realistic here as well. So let's think about bottom-up approach of me having to pay salaries worth $10 million. 25%, let's say, will be the average rate of my target bonuses. I actually have to inject on the ongoing basis another $2.5 million into my fixed costs of the employment. So it's not necessarily will work for all organizations. So I think pay for performance, in a way, has been established traditionally. And I agree there are other ways on how can we encourage the motivation and performance. But traditionally, it is also we need to understand the business perspective on this and understanding how it will actually affect our balance sheets in the end of the day. So ensuring that we have a little bit more liquidity by the year end when all the invoices are being paid, when all the sales are being closed, to be able to reward employees, I guess this sort of like extension of pay rather than maybe pay for performance concept will still remain to be quite important, I guess, for many organizations.
I think we don't really ever really measure how really much variable or variable pay is. How we fund variable pay is very often based on positions and meeting targets, and there's kind of an expectation that most people will receive at least 90% of their on-target bonus or a little bit more. So in effect, it is kind of almost a fixed cost. For me, one of the things that I find really challenging nowadays, and this is this relationship of the way we work nowadays. How do we make sure that me, as the employee, I'm the one who is producing this exact result when we work more and more in teams, more and more in projects? We have companies that work in agile models where they set targets on a quarterly basis. Why don't we pay them quarterly bonuses if they reach those objectives? For corporate employees, they're not salespeople because the quarterly is often for the sales, right? And then the other thing is, I think we're going to see a rise in profit sharing. So maybe I'm just, because I like profit sharing, I find that profit sharing has a nice thing to it. It is variable. It doesn't set an expectation of an acquired right of an amount because it's going to vary year on year. Everybody can contribute at their own level because you increase profit by increasing revenue, but also by reducing cost. So if I'm the last one to leave the building, let me switch off the lights so that they don't burn all day. You know, the small, really small things everybody feels that they can contribute. And at the end of the day, being aligned to profit, well, if you look at the executives and their long-term incentives have to do with EBITDA, which is a measure of profit. So we're fully aligned, we're fully cascading, just in a different way. And we don't need to get into this whole mess of setting individual KPIs that everywhere I go, whether I was in-house for 20 years or now 11 years as a consultant, every client struggles to keep the deadline, to make sure that the objectives are set properly, that they're written in a smart manner, all these. I have a buzzer coming to me, but all these activities around performance management, which often fall under complement. I mean, depends on your organization, but often it's also performance and reward. And we waste so much time. Yeah, so much time. So that's
you put your opportunity. Plus, I think there's an ROI in added attrition. Reduced attrition and enhanced attraction. You will get better people. You will lose less people. Even that serves to help with your cash flow. There are other ways to help with cash flow. I like the idea of profit sharing. I like the idea of basically saying that there's an amount that if we don't get there, I can always deduct, as opposed to an amount that
I have to.
And she's right. We typically budget variable pay at about 1/10 of target. So we actually budget higher if we are going to use variable pay than if we just do base. Because base you just do at base. But if you do base plus bonus, in the books the cost is higher. At least as we start working through your course.
Very rich discussion. Nancy, what do you offer from this?
About your comment on KPIs, or I prefer OKRs, objectives and key results. But also, most of these are being written by ChatGPT now anyway, both the reviewer and the employee, right? So it's no one's talking, maybe give it 6 months, right? Certainly in the employees I'm seeing, and certainly my students when they hit the job market are writing using ChatGPT for these things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because they're not particularly wonderful anyway. But to anticipate what we might see as a change in the next few years is that those 8 OKRs are aligned with the learning outcomes. The way we think about none of the skills they have, we should be rewarding 5 years from now, right? And I know this is part of maybe the next conversation where we're anticipating, but when we think about the evolution of this, I know one big firm, they have about 70,000 employees in Asia and the Middle East, and they have this #learn initiative, right? Everybody has to do an hour a week. It's not aligned to the strategic objectives of the organization, and for some of these people, they don't know how to learn. So one of the ways you may evolve in this space is rewarding learning strategies. Being aware of your learning strategy and then executing it in line with the goals of your team and your organization, right? And again, this is why I think change agents that can impact that motivation to learn, which could come from rewards, would be, and even the opportunity to learn is a benefit, right? Whether that's going out and getting a degree or learning in an in-house learning management system or bringing in experts and allocating your time that way. I think it's Accenture. They spend $900 billion in 2021 on learning and development, right? Now they have 700,000 employees in 2021. So, but that becomes part of the reward system, that you have access to that and you take it to the next employer, right? You get that training to leave, maybe, right? So this is where rewards and benefits, I think, are really intertwined. And firms that aren't up on that will start to lose their good talent.
Yeah. Anyone will try these things?
I'd like to add to Nancy's topic. I really like that you brought ChatGPT, because I was thinking about like AI-driven solutions, and perhaps one of the pay for performance definitions that will evolve in the future. So like we will actually, so I do not necessarily like the term pay for performance. We can say reward for performance already widens your scope as well. And then performance, what is performance? Shall we add reward for continuous performance? Then how do you measure the continuous performance, right? Then all the sort of like AI-driven technologies that are appearing on the market right now, we can even assume that in a couple of years from now, we can tokenize rewards. So you could almost like receive a token for each project from different line managers, from different teams, that otherwise it's in a way virtual rewards that you can cash out, right? Like in the end of the year to maybe, or a couple of times per year, like to help administration of those rewards. But in the end of the day, we shouldn't disqualify the technology and the evolvement of it. Like when we are talking about pay for performance, and pay for performance potentially will continue to exist, but it will mean something else. It will be redefined as, like in my head right now, just appeared as a rewarding for continuous performance. How do I encourage continuous performance? I am encouraging learning, and then like how do I assess the learning that particular individual has done that they can afterwards explore in practice to work. So all of those things we need to be mindful. And well, I'm actually looking forward to see what technology and solutions will bring us.
I think this whole I agree, right? That the terminology pay for performance is tricky.
Yes.
As well as performance. That's why I think I prefer to talk about rewarding impact or innovation or productivity, right? Rather than performance, because we all can just go through our to-do list, but it's does that to-do list create an impact or innovation or whatever it is? Yeah, correct. And I think to the discussion earlier, I do think this whole OKR or however you want to call it, goal settings, that it should be flexible, right? Because organizations change and it's not static. So you need to be flexible, and you need to ultimately try to reward the impact created. Because I do think it's about the appreciation. People need to feel appreciated, recognized, and fundamentally appreciated, right?
Okay, great, excellent. Let's move on. Thank you. Yes, great discussion.
Just give a compliment.
Yes. All right, let's move on to another topic. So we've already mentioned the war for talent in the Middle East and the Asia Pac, and you already alluded to it. So therefore, skills-based pay, or should we call it skills-based reward, is expected to gain more traction in this context, meaning that we link compensation, benefits, etc., more closely to the acquisition and application of specific skills. So this approach raises some other challenges, such as how should skills be priced? What data would you need to collect to build such a pricing model? Organizations traditionally think in terms of roles. So how would you have to adjust if you're moving to a skills-based framework? We can think about this in the context of a life cycle. Fermin talked about attraction, retention, motivation, right? So for example, how would we make job offers in this sort of context? How would we promote staff, right? And you could imagine in this sort of world, a more skills-based world, individuals might be thinking, I can progress by getting more and more expert. But of course, organizations have other needs, for example, managerial and leadership bench, right? So I need people to run the shop as well as to do the work. So this discussion about skills also tends to focus on hard or technical skills, right? But if we're talking, which are easier to quantify and measure, but if we're talking about this, a leadership bench, a managerial bench, it also points to the need for how do we quantify and measure soft or more behavioral skills. So panel, how do you see pay for skills, reward for skills, let's call it that, developing in coming years? So Sandrine.
So I think, first of all, we talk about upskilling and reskilling all the time. Yet, at the first sign of any kind of economic anxiety, the first budget that gets cut by company is training. So let's just also consider that there's a complete dichotomy between those two approaches, because you can't expect the employees to take it upon themselves and to pay for their own education. I mean, some do, but not everybody has the means, and that's not necessarily the right expectation to have, maybe from a gig worker, but from a permanent employee, probably not. So that's just a general point. I think about the question of the hard skills and the soft skills, right? Everywhere you read about the impact that AI is going to have on work, it's like, yeah, AI is going to replace us for all the hard skills. And what will make us different is all our soft skills. Yet when you read about the progress that the big consultancies are making on the skills, it's, as you were saying, all on the hard skills, the coding skills, the ones that are linked to certification and so on, because they're kind of easier to measure. Yeah. We don't have yet a lexicon that we all agree on a global basis of what it is in terms of critical thinking and so on. And I was reading an article recently. There's the chief innovation officer, so the head of IT, for this bank in the US called Esquire Bank, which is a digital bank that specializes in supporting law firms. So it's super targeted. And he was saying we're using two types of AI to support our clients. There is predictive AI, which is based on analyzing data and trying to look forward, and generative AI.
Right.
And when I see some of the employees who only focus on just repeating what ChatGPT told them, but he says, I don't pay you to be good at prompt engineering. I pay you to bring your critical thinking and challenge what the machine is coming to, because as much as you can train it on your own internal data, is still not going to have the capacity to be, not yet at least, to be innovative, to have all the experience that you have, and it doesn't bring the same. So how will we go about that? Because if that's what we really value, our soft skills, why do we only pay for the hard skills, you know?
So in a university, we pay for the soft skills, right? You get an A for that kind of creative thinking. So maybe we can take something from the education sector on this to say, there's a set of rubrics for assessing creativity, for example, right? Which is very controversial. But it comes, this is the American Association of Colleges and Universities, values rubrics. There's 16 of them. And for the creativity, it's initiative, independence, curiosity, ability to transfer content from one context to a new and novel context. And we certainly value those in the way we assess students. And we can use AI to do that. I'd be shocked if I'm still grading papers in 5 years.
I don't.
I mean, I want to spend all my time giving them individual feedback.
Yes.
Right? So fine. Maybe you don't spend all your time reading the KPIs. Instead, you say how to improve on X, Y, and Z, right? In the rewards context. But what we need is people who that curiosity translates into people who have an augmented sense of reality, a self-awareness that enables them to anticipate where the organization needs to go next, where the team needs to go next. And they can participate in collaborative work that also repairs this relationship between the gig worker and the permanent employee, where there's friction, where there's a toxic employee. They have these social skills, but they have a drive to use their independence and initiative to get the team where it needs to go. Anything you can do by yourself is automatable. Yes. Will it take 15 years for some organizations to figure out how to automate anything? Sure. And maybe they'll go out of business in some painful, slow drip. But we're in the United Arab Emirates sitting here. We're in the GCC. These countries have some of the biggest computers in the world, and they have wonderful organizations working to apply AI into making society easier. Organizations that are here that don't pay the right salaries in the talent wars and rewards to bring talent that can think about how to apply this won't thrive. So payment for skills, sure, but recruitment, retention, and progression for demonstrating that curiosity, that creativity, that independence. So not everybody has it. Not everybody wants to have it.
Yes.
Right? Some people say, show me the widget you want me to put into the hole and I'll do it for 40 years. Some organizations need that type of employee. So the rewards need to move in that direction. We don't want everybody to think the same way. So this way of thinking, we do measure these skills in some places, and we're not necessarily doing a good job at it. But I think here in the United Arab Emirates, we have an opportunity to do this workforce transformation, lead the rest of the world on how to do it well.
Yeah. So thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, Nancy. But let me summarize a couple of points. The whole thing of how you measure some of these skills, and not all of these skills are, at least historically, have been easy to measure. And Nancy, you're pointing to, how the intersection between reward for skills and how technology can shape how we do that, and as well as how it structures the work, the interrelationship between humans and machines. So thank you, both of you. Pascale, your thoughts on this?
Yes, probably a little bit taking it to another lens, right? Back to the rewards question a little bit. Like I think again, as a corporate, right, you want to reward for the job that is being done, and so I think the first step that you do take is you look at the job, at the role. I think that's what you do. But I do think it's sensible to look at what the person brings to the organization, be it the experience, capabilities, or the skill set. So there needs to be a balance. But I think looking at the role is probably the first thing that you would do. I think skill-based pay, a pure skill-based pay, there's a lot of good things out there, but I think you need to think very thoroughly. You need to not only about what skills do we want to pay for and how do we price it, but also there's the quantum question, right? Adding new skills, does that equate to larger pay? Maybe, maybe not. What do you do with the skills that are maybe not necessary anymore, not as meaningful anymore?
Is there a life cycle to the skill?
Or
is there a life cycle?
Yeah. And so what does that mean for the to the compensation costs, right? Ultimately, and I have to bring it up again. Pay equity. There's a couple of people doing the same job, and maybe one or two are having a much higher pay level. So how do you explain that? And I think sitting in Asia Pac, we're not bound to the European or US pay equity thinking or restrictions, but pay equity is at the heart. It's important for us, and so I think those are things that you need to think about. So in my head, I think the first thing is you look at the role. I think the second thing is you do look at the individual, but I think it's not straightforward. The pay for skill.
It's a complicated jigsaw puzzle. Many pieces.
And for larger corporations, it's very hard, and you need to have well-trained HR professionals to identify the skills. You need to have good systems, good administration. So I think, and ultimately, you need to make sure that you pay competitively and fairly and in a transparent way. So how do you get that balance?
But Ben, as I move into the future of work, pay for skills is unavoidable. Because gig workers, we are paying them for the skills that they bring. That is exactly why we want to hire them. So this has to happen.
And certainly in a number of geographies, the percentage of gig workers is
doing this.
Right. Yeah.
Growing exponential.
Yeah.
So, okay, I hear some of the issues. Now, these are issues that need to be overcome. These are not issues to say, oh, it's too hard and we can't. First issue, actually, is this uncommon? It isn't. We've been paying for competencies for the longest time. We decide who gets promoted. We put them up on the range based on their competency. Yeah. Well, we may have it explicitly or implicitly, but this is not an entirely foreign concept. So the fact that you want to do it on skills is, again, not an entirely foreign concept. But there's two big complications that one of them Pascale mentioned. The one that Pascale mentioned is this whole idea of the life cycle, as you call it, of a competency. Programming in R or Python, up until a year ago, was one of the hottest skills you could possibly pay for. From now on, ChatGPT codes. So I don't need coders anymore. I need people that can check code. Yeah, but I don't need coders anymore. So all of a sudden, the supply and demand issue changes. Now, if you are paying that competency, now you find yourself that you're overpaying for a competency, or you're paying for a competency you no longer need. Yeah. So I think the idea of paying for competency also comes down to thinking that we may not pay at its salary, but allowances, for competency, so that as long as a competency is needed, then you pay the allowance. Now, I often find that the recruiting people and the compensation people don't talk to each other. And this is surprising because we hire for competencies and we know how this works. Yeah. I want to hire Sandrine. Sandrine is great because she can do this and that and that and that. And I need to pay her a lot of money because she is this good. And then I
attract her.
Yes.
Otherwise she won't.
And then I bring her into the company. And then at the moment I bring her into the company, if I'm not paying for skills, then I say, oh, your comp ratio is now too high. So I have to lower you down and say, wait a minute, you hired me because I was awesome. Yeah. And now you're going to tell me my pay is driven by comp ratio? It actually makes no sense. So the recruiting people do it one way, and then the compensation people do it a completely other way. Yeah. This has to end. So if we are able and willing, let me put it this way, to hire for competency, we need to be able to continue to pay for the same reason that we hired her. Yeah. Because the next company that's going to hire her, now that she's paid by comp ratio, is also going to hire her for her skills.
Exactly. So it's going to get the zigzag. Yeah.
So we need to solve this problem.
Yeah.
The second problem is, where is the data? This is a true problem for every compensation person. And I can sit in Pascale's chair thinking, yes, I need to pay Sandrine, but how much? So Sandrine says, oh, I'm worth, $1 million of whatever.
Right. A lot.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, clearly.
Or whatever. Right? And she's there thinking, how do I know if that million whatevers is a good deal? Is it an ROI? How do I deal with my equity? How do I deal with market equity? We don't know. So that is a real problem.
Yeah.
We need to address this problem. Traditional survey providers so far are not providing, at least not in this region. I have spent a lot of time in a lot of different countries, both in Asia and the Middle East. This data doesn't exist. So we're going to have to create new ways of doing things. Some of the methods that I think have shown a lot of promise is trolling job portals. This is true.
I can imagine.
There are companies now that control job portals and give you data on how in the job portals different people are making offers for different competencies,
right?
And try to get at that data in a completely different way that we do today. It's not the traditional.
You're crawling for market prices, aren't you?
Yes, the market needs to evolve a little bit with us, but there are already tools out there for the comp community to start looking at data differently, finding data differently, and then figuring out if
is a decent price.
Yeah, exactly. Cheap.
It's cheap. Thank you, Fermin, for taking us through that discussion. Mariia, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there are so many points that we've touched upon, like learning and development, recruitment, how feasible it is to evaluate the price for a skill. So I'll start probably from my perspective on skills, and I think that they're mostly driven by three key factors, right? Like, so we are talking about market demand, talent scarcity, and actually your organizational objectives. So just taking my current example, my current role at GFG Alliance, we do have business goals. We would like to be carbon neutral in the next 6 years. So we are after green skills. That's all other discussion. How am I, first of all, looking for those green skills? Do I change my entire proposition and my job description, moving away from the role-based sort of like job search to competency-based job search? How do I evolve my learning and development? Because we've just talked about the skill cycle, and if in the next 5 years, are those skills going to be relevant or not relevant, and how I'm going to continue enhancing all those skills? And then am I correct to assume that in 15 years, all of us will have to have green skills? Because in the end of the day, we are sort of like moving to a more sustainable future, isn't it? So I think that it is very difficult to evaluate the price for a skill. And the only short-term solution in my head that I can see right now, and that I potentially could push, and I see this evolving as well, even in our organization, is basically creating the ranges, because we were talking about the pay equity as well, where you have two individuals performing very similar jobs. But what you do in your organization, you're promoting horizontal growth. So moving away from a traditional vertical career ladder, stepping miles, and you can increase your pay while remaining in the same position by acquiring all those extra skills. Then maybe my skills can be transferable, even for me, from being head of reward into head of talent, and then head of learning and development, etc. So you learn, you get paid, you stretch your ranges, and that's how you can continue encouraging.
Where you're going is actually, what's the shape of a career path? What's the meaning of work? Why do I come to work? Right, which may be very different from what we might have thought 10, 15, 20 years ago in last corporate.
And maybe different from person to person.
Yeah, yes, very individual. Right, great. I want to close up. Nancy, you wanted to add in something about the role of the state.
Just to say that different nations offer training for the whole population in this context, right? Mm-hmm. So firms that are global, are operating in multiple countries, should attract themselves to delivering rewards and benefits where the base skill talent is high. But also we have Generation Alpha on the horizon, people born after 2010. The oldest are 13, 14 years old. They'll be in the workplace in 4 years. And most of them in the next 10 years will come from China, India, and Nigeria. So if you want young talent, That's where it will come from. You either bring it to you or you go to them. This is where the demographics right? So this reward, and how do we use our lenses of equity, access, and inclusion to attract that young talent? Because there's not a lot of young people around these days. So this is also part of the talent wars that I just wanted to add. Those people not necessarily come from countries or regions of very large countries where there's access to the development that would come from a smaller country like the United Arab Emirates.
And given that we're in Dubai, this is a very relevant...
The idea of this horizontal growth, I love it because it goes along with this. You could have multiple allowances inside the same job title based on the tasks you're performing in a given time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. I really enjoyed the discussion. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.